Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT, Oro Muscles, and Firefly Recovery. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Oro Muscles revolutionizes rehabilitation with real-time actionable insights into muscle activity with live biofeedback and instant analysis, which has made a huge impact in my work with athletes. For more on Oro, be sure to check out oromuscles.com. Episodes like this are made possible by Firefly, the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. Joining me today on the podcast is Jill Lane. Jill and I were initially connected by Anthony Cockrell, and she also came up again when I did the podcast with John Bloom. And I was like, I really need to get Jill on an episode. Jill is a phenomenal person, and she is a wealth of knowledge, in particular around the sports nutrition space. And today we kind of dive into a conversation around sports nutrition for the athlete. And we really get into a lot of different principles and framework kind of conversations, things that can be very, very applicable for all athletes and coaches. This is not an impossible to understand research paper with words that are just going to fly over top of your heads. We really went out of our way to try and make this as actionable as possible for everyone, regardless of what your title is. So I'm really excited to have Jill on the episode today and look forward to doing many more episodes with her in the future as we work to shed some light in the sports nutrition space for you all. Enjoy. Jill, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, and big shout out to our mutual friend Anthony for helping us get connected. For people who aren't familiar with you and all the incredible work you've done in the sports nutrition space, would you mind filling in a little bit about who you are and all that you do?
Thanks so much for having me, Dan. I'm super pumped, and I'm really blessed that Anthony connected us. He's, at the top of the pyramid in what he does, so I always appreciate a referral from a colleague of that level. And honestly, that's just a great description of what it is I do. I'm just kind of like a master collaborator. My position at this junction of my career, I've 25 years in the industry, 15 working with elite level athletes, the guys that win Super Bowls and NBA championships. I have a brand for student athletes called Fueling Champions. I've done almost every job in my industry for the last 25 years. At this point, I have a advising, consulting, and management business that helps performance centers, big industry companies, and teams and pro athletes manage all the points of making sure that they're available, that they can perform, that they have longevity in their sport or business, and a couple other things that are key to me in my business personally. But when I'm talking with other professionals in the industry, one of those would be collaboration. So my job is to make sure my athletes, the businesses I work with, and the performance centers are available to do the work, that they can do the work when they're called upon, whether that's perform or whether that's train or whether that's program or whether that's show up with a lot of energy, and that they can do it as long as they choose to. Longevity in sport, especially at the pro level, is a very underrated and I think oftentimes underemphasized goal. I'm really proud that most of my athletes stay in their league more than double the league average. And so for me, that is a big deal, as it is for them. And then collaboration. So I wouldn't be here without collaboration with guys like Anthony. And I'm blessed every day of the week to work with amazing strength coaches, athletic trainers, physical therapists, functional medicine doctors. And that's the way it should be in today's world. It's not always like that, even at the pro level, but we're getting there. And I'm just really trying to make a dent in that with the work that I do.
I love that you started with that you are a master collaborator, because I completely agree. That's what we all need more of. For a long time, I've seen walls kind of form between the professions when in reality, none of us can do all the work ourselves that way. And in today's day and age, it just seems like we're living in this constant state of, to use your words from before we even jumped on the podcast, information overload, where there's just new information coming out all the time, and it's impossible for any one person to keep up to date with all of the information that comes out about all of the different facets that impact athlete performance, whether that be training, sleep, nutrition, stress management, mental health, and so on that way. there's so many different variables that go into this. And obviously, your expertise speaks a lot towards the sports nutrition side in particular. And that's something that I feel like we haven't done a good enough job, or I haven't done a good enough job, I should say, on the podcast, really bringing about. And yet it plays such a crucial role into these athletes' daily lives and overall game day performance. And to your point, even the longevity piece, how long can they stay in the sport, but also how do they feel when they're playing the sport? Because I've had some athletes that are 22, 23 years old, and they tell me they're like, look, I feel like I'm 40 right now. And I've had others who are, 28, 30 running laps around them. So there's definitely an impact on all of these different things in that. And like I said, I think the nutrition piece is crucial to understand there, but we have so much information about it. And I know a lot of people just they get what we call analysis paralysis, if you will, where they're looking at all this information, trying to take it all in and figure out where to go, and they just kind of end up stuck and not sure which direction to take that way. So walk me through, if you're working with an athlete and they don't necessarily have any kind of nutrition guideline or practice, and they're just kind of going about their day, eating, what everyone else does when everyone else does, how do you kind of go about taking all of the information that's out there and giving it to them in a framework that they can actually apply to their daily lives, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, first things first is to know what their goals are and to get to know them as a person. So before I even get to the widgets and the gadgets and the sports science and the numbers and the aura data and the whoop and all the things, I need to know who they are as a person. And I need to know what's important to them. I need to know their history with nutrition, with sports science, with strength and conditioning. So I have an ex-phys degree, and nutrition is my passion. And so for me, that's been a great asset because I understand the movement portion of it as well as the nutrition. And I'm heavily trained in integrative sports nutrition. So for me, it goes way deeper than just electrolytes and sports drinks. And it's been like that since my career started. And we can get into that more in a little bit, but I have to understand the person first and who they are and what's real for them. I have to understand their hangups, what they've tried before, what food preferences they have. And it's just through conversation, right? So whether it's on a Zoom, on FaceTime, on a call, in person, and then as we kind of build that relationship and that trust, then I can start to utilize the data, whether that's science, whether that's my own experience and opinion, whether that's data they've collected, whether it's team load management data, whatever I have, it all comes together in the design. There's not one of those that I believe is more heavily weighted than the other. They each play an equal role. I'm not going to weigh too heavily on, HRV. I'm not going to weigh too heavily on just letting the science tell me what to do, because if that was the case, we would all stay a decade behind. I'm not going to weigh too heavily on even my own opinions, because sometimes I have to just always be checking my own personal agenda and just make sure that I'm hearing what they say. But there's the common thread for all of it is the things I already mentioned. My job is to keep them available for them to be able to perform when they're called upon, and for them to be able to do it as long as they possibly can in collaboration with anybody else that might be on their personal or sports team, coach, chef, whoever it might be, partner, spouse. And then, make sure in the big picture of it that they have like a solid well-being in doing that we're not sacrificing who they are as a person, that they just have like a really strong identity. That's just like an undercurrent of work that I've personally done. I wish I was stronger at it in the beginning of my career, but anybody that works with me or learns from me now knows we spend a lot of time there, because when you work with an athlete long enough that you're blessed to see them through a career and into retirement, there is a huge life transition there. And I have unfortunately had, a handful of clients pass away within years of retirement. And it's something that I will never let go of. It's something that will never leave me. It's something that I will never look back on. And as they say, is there something I could have done differently as a group of people around these particular athletes for their health, for their mental well-being? And so my job in this part of my career is just to pass it on to as many people. I spend a lot of time teaching. But back to your question, I'm gathering all the data, but first I'm making sure I understand who they are and what's real to them. And then I want to know how much can they handle at once? Because again, if you've learned from I'm gonna if you give me the green light, I will hit you with the fire hose. Meaning, this will be not a sniper; it will be a shotgun effect. We will try to affect as many things as possible. And sometimes with certain athletes, we have to do that because we only have 60 or 90 days to get an effect. And sometimes we have more time. So again, that's part of understanding the goal at hand. But we're taking in all that information, and then we're just kind of going to the brass tacks of the macros, of the functional integrative nutrition testing, of any performance data that we have that we can feather in. Sleep, again, how do they, what's their stress resilience and adaptation like as a person, like psychologically and spiritually? And then again, I'm like, how much do you want to start with? And we make decisions together. Are we going to jump in the deep end, feet first, or are we going to just kind of wade out there? And then, we just start knocking down the tasks, whatever that needed to be based on all the data, and move them towards just being, well nourished, well fueled, well supplemented, well rested, well adapted, as much as they could be for whatever their sport is and who they are as a person.
I love that person-centric approach so much. And that's something that I feel like the more we get into this world of, as you mentioned, objective data and testing and technology, the more we realize how much we actually need the subjective stuff, the simple stuff that a lot of us have, maybe neglected a little bit lately, right? And I think that, to your point, we can't just take all of the information that we can get from a simple conversation with someone and put that into one objective data score. We actually have to get to know people and connect with them. And I think the more personal you get with someone, the more effective you're going to be in the work that you do that way. And to your point, too, a lot of people are different and they have different preferences. Maybe they have different foods that they like or don't like, but maybe there's also cultural influences or religious influences as well. There's an individual that I work with who has some religious influences where they end up fasting sometimes, and that drastically changes what we do from a rehab standpoint because, maybe on one day they've actually, carved up and kind of fueled for the session. And the next day they're kind of running on fumes and on empty, for lack of a better way to put it. So all of these different factors, I think, coming together certainly make for such a unique dynamic when it comes to working with athletes from a nutrition standpoint. And you also mentioned that you don't like to rely on one specific thing, which I really like. It's the combination of everything coming together. What does that person say? What is my own expertise in this field and my own opinion? What does the data say? And how do we take all these things, put it together into a picture that best aligns with what this athlete is going to need now, but also for the remainder of their athletic career, and kind of beginning with that end in mind, knowing that, hey, we want them to be healthy and playing the sport for 15 years, 20 years in the future and beyond that way. I think that's a really incredible lens to look through. And I think that framework really applies, as you mentioned, with your exercise phys background. It applies to more than just nutrition. We could take that same kind of framework and apply it to strength and conditioning or any other field, right? Get to know the person that you're working with, collaborate with as many people as possible, make sure that the athletes are available when they need to be, make sure they're able to perform at the level they want, last for a long time, and kind of bring everything together in their best interest that way. I'd imagine that there's been some unique cases or obstacles that have come up along your path, though. Has there been any time where you deviate from that framework, or is that framework kind of tried and true and continues to hold strong with whatever challenges you're facing that way?
Well, in an ideal situation, I'm collaborating with everybody, but there are situations when people haven't been bitten themselves by the collaboration bug quite yet. And so when that happens, we just work around it. I'm not going to not do something that we believe is in the best interest of the athlete because I can't get on the phone with the pro team dietitian or the strength and conditioning or director of performance or their private sector healthcare practitioner, fill in the blank, whatever that might be. So, I gather as much data as I can just, from the athlete, and then we work around, so in ideal setting, we get to talk to everybody and it's a team approach. And, that's again, like you said, in the best interest of the athlete getting what they need. But there certainly are times, even in 2025, when people just, for whatever reason, they don't have that same approach. So we do what we can, and we can be as successful. It's great when we have those relationships, and I'm so thankful and I have so much respect, especially at the pro team level, when someone who's associated or affiliated with the team is willing to, stay in touch with the person outside of the team. It takes a lot of them checking their ego. I have so much respect for them when they're willing to truly be a teammate of ours, when they understand the common goal is said athlete. It's not about me, it's not about them. And so I have so much respect for my colleagues at the teams who are willing to, receive phone calls from me and text with me and preparation and do whatever we need to do. So that's the ideal situation, but it's not always ideal. Like, let's not paint this beautiful picture that it always works that way. It maybe I'd say 60% of the time does, and the other 40% it doesn't. And athletes present at different in different areas of need. When I started this 15 years ago, athletes weren't getting functional nutrition testing. The sports nutrition was just sports drinks and protein shakes and maybe creatine at that time, but no one even really knew why they were taking it. They were just taking it. And so fast forward, integrative testing has become more accepted. It's not new. Like, integrative testing for athletes is not new. It's just definitely more accepted in the mainstream now to test for nutritional deficiencies and omega-3 index and to check on microbiome and gut health and all of that. So depending on how the athlete comes to me, their food might be dialed. Like, they might have the most amazing chef and they've just been missing, if you think of it as pieces of the puzzle, getting that testing done. They've been missing really having the right person on their performance team, or maybe they just need like a really great body work or chiro type person. And so for me, sometimes I'm just helping them upgrade or find the people to fill out the puzzle, because they've been able to nail and they've done an amazing job with a portion of the puzzle, but we still have some gaps and they still want to play in their league for 5, 6, 7, 8 more years. Or maybe they had an injury, so they're looking at things through a different lens. My job, as in this advisement management role, is not just to kind of run point on nutrition and do the obvious collaboration with chef, etc., but it's also to okay, who are we missing potentially from our team that would really serve this athlete based on where they are at their career, their health, their movement, all of the things. So for me, that's why collaboration is so key, because I'm oftentimes looking for other pieces of the puzzle outside of my scope that I know will either help amplify what I'm doing, or will serve the athlete in another area that they need, that I've discovered through our conversation. So again, that's just part of the fact-finding mission when they come to me. That's why we have, some long conversations and get to know each other, so I can kind of see the big picture, help them fill the gaps. And sometimes it's within my scope in a big way, and sometimes it's a few places we need to just really dial in. And then I might see a void in a few areas and can connect them with a great professional to just help, make sure they get what they need.
Yeah, in a way, you act as a guide to the athlete. You point them in the right direction that way, and kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, Sherpa them along their journey that they're on. And I think that's really, really impactful, because the athlete remains in control. They're autonomous. They understand what's going on. They have a say in the decisions that are made. And a lot of times that's just not the case for athletes. They're being told what to do, how often to do it, when in reality, now we're actually giving them a seat at the metaphorical table and saying, hey, look, you can actually have an influence here. And it's interesting too, you mentioned the evolution of sports nutrition and how, some places used to be just sports drinks and protein shakes. And as someone who visits a lot of places, some places are still doing sports drinks and protein shakes and nothing else. And some have not even gotten to that level yet. So to your point on collaboration, and we have some catching up to do there. We also have some catching up to do on the nutrition side, because there are some that are literally just giving their kids more food and telling them to just eat more, and that will fix everything that they ever, have been concerned with, when in reality, it's probably not just eating more stuff. It's probably also an element of eating the right things. And to your point on individualization and testing and finding deficiencies, obviously that all helps paint the full picture of the puzzle that we were looking at metaphorically. How do you go about, though, because you mentioned before that, we like tech and testing, but we don't want to get too lost in it that way. Where should people kind of, if you're giving advice to the athlete at home that way, who maybe their university or team or whatever setting they're in doesn't have the best nutrition setup at this time, and they're still stuck in that sports drink and protein shake market, if you will. Where should they kind of go? Should they seek out individual testing, or what about the athletes where, hey, they're eating pretty good and it's all good right now, everything's working, the check engine light for the body is not going off, if you will. Should they get their nutrition checked? Should they get different things checked and start dialing in? Or, are they okay to kind of cruise along the metaphorical highway a little longer?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I mean, this answer will apply to any athlete, both genders, any sport, any level, 13-year-old swimmer, 26-year-old NFL player, that we have to keep the main thing the main thing. So to be clear, I love tech and I use it all the time. I'm not afraid of AI taking my job at any time because the personal element and connection is real to keeping your athletes and just adding the element that tech can never add. So I'm a fan and I love protein shakes and I love electrolytes. So let's just clear that. Let's just know that that's not sport. That's not all sports nutrition is and should be, right? Tech, sports drinks, and protein shakes. Now, to the fairness of certain universities and schools, that might be all their budget can allow them to provide. And if you're providing that, like, God bless you, thank you for at least trying to get something into your athletes. But where every athlete should start, then we should never make an assumption that the pros know how to do this, that the college kids at the big schools know how to do this, and that the teenagers know how to do this because their parents might be educated or they're on social media, is that they need to know really three basic things. How much of what to eat when. The biggest needle movers for student athletes, in my experience, is when to eat and what to have at those meals. And so I think we get the cart way before the horse. And I've seen this and I have amazing colleagues that I see doing this. And I'm like, yes, guys, we want them to not maybe have as much junk food. And if you have a personal burning desire to get people off seed oils, like, amazing. But just remember, you can't take an F diet to an A overnight. Like, these kids are eating breakfast, they're rolling into strength conditioning or practice on empty. They haven't eaten lunch for 5 or 6 hours. Their lunch was only 30 minutes and they talked for half because they needed social time. So they didn't get all their food in. Let's keep the main thing the main thing. First, let's get them eating at the right times and make sure that there's protein at each of those meals. Then we can start to drill down. Okay, what are the carbohydrates? Can we upgrade those sources? Are they eating any semblance of some sort of efficient performance fat? Like, let's make sure we start with the big things that make a difference. And that's how I start with everybody. I'm taking all that tech, like I said before, but then I'm going, okay, I'm going to sit down. You train at 9 a.m. Monday through Friday in the off season for NFL with your strength coach. And, you're going to be there for 2 hours, and we reverse engineer what time they should be eating and then use the tech to decide what and how much at those meals. And that's how everybody starts. Everybody starts. Now, whether you can tackle, I just need to work on meal timing for 2 weeks, and then I'm going to work on protein, and then I'll work on, or I can do it all at once, is a very individualistic thing. Like I was saying, how much can they handle at one time? How much can they do? What kind of support do they have? But with student athletes in particular, my biggest focus always is what time you should be eating in your schedule. I'm developing some tech for this, like as we speak, because it's the biggest need, and what should be at those meals. So that is where I start with everybody. But in the student athlete population, it is for sure the biggest place to start. We have to keep the main thing the main thing. I can't even talk, testing and all that stuff is amazing. But if the testing is revealing micronutrient, amino acid, essential fatty acid deficiencies, let's just say, and you're not even eating those foods, then what am I measuring? So let's get raw materials in the diet. Let's measure to see where you're at. Let's make sure we keep those raw materials in, use the results of the testing to fine tune all of that from a supplement and macronutrient standpoint, and then retest. And most student athletes don't need any sort of advanced testing. They need a really great blood panel from their pediatrician or general practitioner. Most student athletes have never had just a basic comprehensive metabolic profile with added vitamin D, iron, B12, which is what I recommend for parents, and vitamin D. And so that's like the first thing. Like they go to the yearly physical every year and they never get blood drawn because it's not standard of care. Their pediatrician or general practitioner even doesn't even have an idea that they're an elite level 16-year-old soccer player who travels and practices 3 hours a day. Like they've never talked to their patient about that. They don't know. And so I always suggest that the parents of student athletes let their provider know, hey, this is the amount of time my student athlete spends training. And because of that, when we come in once a year, I'd like to get a basic profile with these added micronutrient tests. And they'll bat an eye, but remember, you're the paid insurance person. And 8 out of 10 times there will be a deficiency that comes back, almost always vitamin D, oftentimes iron. If they were able to do red blood cell magnesium, maybe 50% there. But I've never seen a normal vitamin D test in any of my youth athletes who bring testing back to me. Never, not one time. So we like to say, oh, these kids aren't deficient and we can get everything we need from food. But I wish we could get everything we need from food. But as soon as you start testing, I don't care what the research says. As soon as you start doing individual testing and seeing testing from teams or whoever it might be, the proof is in the testing. It's an N=1 experiment at that point. And so that's where I said we can't rely on research to dictate all of our choices. We use it to help us scratch our head and expand our knowledge, confirm what we might know, challenge our biases, help us, just like question and, confirm different things. But if you only do things based on what the research says, you will always, always be behind. Always be behind. There's a very, well-known sports nutritionist in the industry. There was, it goes through cycles on social media where people just kind of start picking on a particular nutrient from time to time. And, magnesium L-threonate went through like a phase like last fall for like a month or two where there was lots of influential people in the industry posting that there's no science to show it helps with sleep, this, that, or the other. Well, those of us who use it and have people track REM and deep sleep on their Aura, their Whoop, for sure have noticed that it's improving REM and deep sleep. Therefore, at a minimum, improving sleep quality. It's probably why the cognitive data shows that magnesium L-threonate is great for your brain. And sure enough, in the last month or two, there's been some research published to prove that out. But back to the metrics, like if you're paying attention to how things work, you're looking at data, you see things working in different ways that, you see one tool that we thought could just hit one hammer, be able to hit 4 hammers. We know that about creatine now. We know that about collagen now. We know that there's just not one hammer that some of these things can hit. And if you pay attention and you understand physiology, you can imagine how things could be or are working because you're seeing everything from a 30,000-foot view and not so pigeonholed on is there science or research or not. And so we're getting better at that in my industry, but we are still like loving to have one foot in the dark ages. And we're getting closer to living in the current and then thinking creatively about what could be possible in the future. And so that's where collaboration and just having an open mind and understanding, even personally, for me, just the understanding of physiology and the loose understanding I have of some of the other disciplines serves me creatively to understand how something could work in more than one way. Athletic training is like that. There's a lot of crossover between physical therapy and athletic training and strength and conditioning. You're using each other's modalities to help with the transition time and to help with recovery. And so, integrative and functional medicine and nutrition, should live there as well. And we're getting better at it. I'm so encouraged over the last 2 to 5 years, but we have some work to do still. And that's, when I teach to colleagues in my industry, like that's just what I'm trying to do, is just help us think more forward instead of being so rooted in the past and the research from the past.
Yeah, constantly evolving and thinking ahead. And I love your point about focusing on, in the metaphorical jar here, the rocks instead of the sand, the big things, not the small things that carry less weight first. Not to say that we don't need the sand, but if we put the sand in before the rocks are not going to fit in this jar. We have to hit the rocks first, and then the sand kind of fills in around it, if you will. With that in mind, too, at least for what I've seen with athletes, and I'm not as well trained or well versed in this as you are by any means, but I've noticed that this formula of protein, produce, and then some kind of additional like carbohydrate source. I call it protein produce plus. Those two things plus something else seems to work pretty well for the majority of them, and it keeps it simple enough. But to me, that's like that metaphorical rock in the jar that way. You mentioned the meal timing piece, though, and you mentioned that a couple times and how important that is. Is meal timing something that, there's one blanket recommendation for everyone? Like I see people saying, oh, stop eating 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed at night. Or is it one of those things where, hey, maybe we have to individualize that a little more? And if so, how do athletes know what timing works well for them? Are there certain signs that their body might be giving them if their meal timing is off or if it's correct? Or do they have to do additional testing to kind of figure out what their like optimal feeding windows are, if you will?
Yeah, I love this. I mean, I think this is one area where testing doesn't apply, which is great. It's very personalized. It's very, how do you feel? You're asking a lot, like, how do you feel? And to your point, teaching them what the signs and symptoms of you, if you will, might be of being underfueled. I've spent the last 5 years teaching a lot on a concept called low energy availability. And as that becomes chronic, it can lead into something called REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport. To some, it's basically just not having enough available energy for both daily metabolic need and performance. And that's a real big trap that our youth athletes can fall in because they additionally need fuel for growth and development. And so when you eat, and eating enough is important, just because as you become an athlete training at a higher intensity or more often, or as you are a student athlete whose calories are now dispersed through growth and development, daily metabolic need, and strength and conditioning and training and practice and skills and all the things student athletes do now, it's very easy to be underfueled. And it's hard to consume all you need in like one meal a day or 2 meals a day. And so we disperse the meals throughout the day strategically just to kind of keep the gas tank full, so that when you show up to whatever it is you need to show up with, your blood sugar is nice and balanced, you can focus. Your gastrointestinal tract is happy so that you don't have gas or bloating and feel like you're going to poop during practice, that you don't have maybe too much weight in your stomach so it negatively is influencing sleep. We want to have good sound sleep. So some of that is a feel. And so I teach in my workshop for student athletes. It's hard for me in a group of a bunch of people to know what everybody's caloric need is, but what I can teach you is how it feels to be low in energy. And most of us know this, right? We know what it feels like to drag during practice. We know what it feels like to be falling asleep during class. We know what it feels like to not be able to focus. We know what it feels like to not have a great game because you were just, some of this could be due to dehydration, by the way, very similar crossover and kind of symptoms, subgroups. And so you first of all just teach people how to start to notice how their body feels, right? Like in your discipline as well, like, do you have pain? Do you have tightness? It's like the same thing, like start to be a bit more mindful of how you feel in certain times. And then in that, then they can start to use that as like a thermostat to, okay, my end goal with athletes is to become obsolete when it comes to them, me having to like really handhold how many carbohydrates, let's just say, they might need before a meal, because I need them to be able to start to understand, okay, I feel tired if I only have an apple before practice, but if I have a protein shake, an apple, and a rice cake with nut butter on it, I can get through practice. It sits well on my stomach and I'm still energized after. And so there are some basic tenets from the literature we can use. We can lean on science for this, but then we have to try it on because everybody's digestive tract is different. Everybody's tolerance for digestion of different combinations of macros are different. There's no real hard and fast times to fueling. Like we think, okay, the best time for a pregame meal is roughly 2 to 4 hours before, but I'm going to say that's going to depend on what's in it. And then the best time, depending on what sport you're in and how long the lead up the pregame might be and what your pregame looks like, you might need a top off of carbohydrates right before your game starts within the 60 to 30-minute window. But what that is going to be very dependent upon you. When I was a student athlete at Division I level, I could not tolerate sports drinks at all. They immediately gave me stomach cramps and made me feel like I had to poop my pants. Like I could not handle it. Now I know, because I was just like extremely dehydrated, that the sodium in there was causing an osmotic effect in my gut and just basically making me feel like I had gut rot or bubble gut. But I needed carbohydrates and I needed electrolytes. So there's other things I could have done. And so we're basically, the general gist is like every 3 to 4 hours, we're putting something in the tank to top it off. What's in that is going to depend on when did you train last? When do you have to train again? How much muscle mass do you have? What are your goals? So we're using the personalized factors to dictate that. But most athletes are eating, most team sport athletes and higher level, single sport athletes like a tennis player, etc., our swimmer are eating roughly every 3 to 4 hours. They're having a pregame meal roughly roughly 2 to 3 hours before the match or the game. They're topping off their tank roughly 30 to 60 minutes before tip off or whatever the game is. We're eating after training and games within an hour or two. That's very dependent upon when did the game end and when do you have to practice or play again. How soon we need to move that up to when practice or game ended. And again, what's in there is going to depend on what feels good to them. So I might give a suggestion and then we practice fueling during the week. I say, hey, okay, we're going to try on a few pre-game snacks or mini meals so that we know on game day, we have like a list of things to pull from that we know sit well with you. So just like anything, we're practicing for game day with our food. And so we're trying different combinations. Some people might not be able to tolerate a shake. It might sit too heavy in their belly. They need a solid protein. They need liquid carbohydrate. Some people might be the opposite of that. And so, again, that's where the individual variation comes in, because that's where, again, gut health, food preferences, what they have access to, what their budget is, might dictate what those collections of foods might be. So we have some loose research to timing that we can consider, but then we layer in that customization around the timing of the day, what their goal is, who they are, how much lean body mass they have, and some of those other factors. But I'd say every 3 to 4 hours, most likely. Most of my student athletes are eating 5 times a day. And my pros, depending upon their sport, their load, and their current body comp, and where they are, and minimum eating 4 times a day and sometimes 5 also. And so, there's only so many hours in the day. If you divide that out, waking hours, it's roughly about every 3-ish to 4-ish hours, you're making a deposit. And then that just gets jogged around when the game is, when the practice is, when school is, when meetings are, etc.
Yeah, I like that concept. And as you were talking, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking this would be a great space for athletes to enter like a journal or something in the picture so that they can actually note these things themselves that way. And I think the other piece that goes into that as well is just kind of teaching the athlete what abnormal signs are. Like, if you eat dinner and you walk around feeling bloated for the next 3 hours, like, hey,
Yeah.
maybe that's a sign that something's wrong. That's not just normal American life. It's, hey, that's your body trying to tell you something, and you should listen to it and try and learn from it, as opposed to just kind of shrugging our shoulders and say, you know what, that's just how life is at this point that way. And you also mentioned, as you were talking, you mentioned about that low energy density or low energy availability and just how easy it is for athletes to be underfueled. And obviously, if athletes are listening to this and they hear, oh my gosh, like pros are eating 4 times a day, or high school, college athletes are eating 5 times a day, like that might come as a surprise to many of them, because I've worked with several who only eat once or twice a day, and they're trying to get a full day's worth of calories. Now, mind you, they're doing about 20 hours a week of activity on top of their normal day-to-day activities that, just kind of come with life of a high school or college athlete, if you will. And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get all of that caloric intake and all of that nutritional need in 1 or 2 meals. And I'm not the expert here by any means, but I'd have to question too, how much of that can the body even absorb at one time, right?
Yeah.
Because it's great that you brought it in, but is your body actually going to absorb it and do something with it, or is it just going to kind of pass through that way? So as you mentioned, it's very easy for athletes to be underfueled, but I know a lot of pushback from some of them exists when it comes to this concept of, wait, do I really have to eat more? Or, do you really want me to eat 4 to 5 times a day? And, obviously there's a need for them to do that depending on their sport demands. but there's always a little bit of a barrier that exists for some of these athletes that way. How do you kind of approach the athlete who maybe doesn't feel comfortable or wants to push back a little bit about this concept of, eating more, if you will, that way?
Yeah, I mean, if their goal is to add lean body mass, let's just say they want to add muscle, they're working with a strength coach, or they just had an injury, they're in to see athletic training and physical therapy, then there's really no way around it. Now, back to you can't take an F diet to an A overnight. If they're only eating twice a day in your example, then I might not be able to get them to five, 2 days later, but I can get them to three and then maybe with a protein shake. And so it doesn't have to necessarily be 5 meals. I just watch a group of NFL guys getting ready for the combine through this exact math to make sure they were well fueled to attain their results. And so 3 solid meals, a shake, and then the other one could be a shake. It could be, what I like to call a mini meal. It's bigger than a snack, but it's not a full meal. And so again, we go, okay, you're eating 2 meals now. Let's look at your schedule and let's look at your goal. Basically, the reality is if you're serious about this goal, then this is not optional. I mean, it's just talking to people in a loving way to let them know this is what you want to achieve. This is what has to be done to get there. Now, could you get it all in 4 meals? There's a strong chance that we could divide those calories, those macros into 4 meals for sure. 2 meals a day, to your point, we know now we can digest through and blow through, more protein than we ever knew in one meal and still get some benefit. But the issue is, can we digest through all of it? And can we really get through all of it? And if someone is supposed to, some of these swimmers have upwards of 3,000 calories, they need to get in a day, sometimes 4. You mean to tell me you're going to eat 2 meals, that's 2,000 calories? It's really difficult to do just from a food volume standpoint. You get full. And so I think we have a service as the coach, whatever our title is, to be real with people in a loving way. Like, this is what you said your goal is. Is this still your goal? Yes. Then these are the pieces of the puzzle to get there. We're going to work towards 4 to 5 meals per day. You're currently doing 2. So this week we're going to add 1, right? So it just kind of goes back to the coaching element of it. And then we find a time that they could add 1 and we show them that it is possible. Oftentimes people just have developed an excuse or a poor habit or just aren't seeing it through the lens of possibility that they can do it. And part of our role is helping to show them that it's actually not that hard. They can do it. They have this little window of time here. They're going to grab these few extra things as they're out the door for work or their school so that they have them after school as they're driving from point A to point B. And that's all it took. And then they just have to go buy those things in the weekend so they're prepared and then they have it. So part of our role is not just telling people how to do it, it's showing them and then giving the human touch. If you follow me on social media, you see me using some language a lot that's champion yourself and champion people. My job is to be a champion of people. And in that, I have to help people see what's possible when they can't see it. I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have had the student athlete career that I've had. I wouldn't have the career that I have in this industry that I'm so blessed to have without people championing me. To this day, people still champion me in big projects and visions I work on. That is our role. It's our role to pass that on. And to help people see what's possible and then to help them figure out how to get it done. And so that's why we use tech and we use AI, but I'm never afraid those people that will take over for the human connection, because tech and AI can't help people see what's possible. It can't help them create their goals. That is one-to-one conversations. That is the tangibleness of just like loving people and being a champion of what it is they're trying to achieve. And so if we're serious about the discipline that we represent, whatever that might be, athletic training, strength conditioning, nutrition, sports science, medicine, then we have to be brave enough to have those conversations in a loving way and say, you know what, you totally can do this. And here would be a great time to put this meal. And then do you think you could go get X, Y, and Z? Yeah, I can get that. Okay, perfect. That's all we need. This week, let's just go from 2 to 3. And then once we tackle that, boom, we'll work to 4. And then they might be going, you know what? I can make that shake at night while I'm studying or after I get home from meetings. Okay, boom. Now we're at 4. And so just helping people see what's possible, reminding them of what they told us their goals are. and then helping them see what's possible and helping them solve for those big rocks is just as much a part of our job as the nuts and bolts of the, okay, you have to do 3 sets of this and you have to do 40 grams of protein. If we just end there, then you're replaceable. You're replaceable. There's more to helping people get results than just the numbers on a page, the reps and sets, the grams of macros. There's way more to it than that. And when you embrace that and, can just, champion the people that are in your care, just like really magical things happen, like lifelong changes and skills you can teach people when you look at it through that lens.
Yeah, 100%. It becomes that game of lifting everyone up to higher ground that way. And I think that a lot of times people get afraid that if they help someone else up to that higher ground, that they're going to get left behind. But in reality, I've never seen someone get pushed further down by lifting others up. It only elevates everyone. There's a saying about rising tides raise all the ships in the water. And at the end of the day, it sounds like that's really something that we need to do from a nutrition standpoint. But there are times when, everyone is lifting each other up to higher ground. Everything is going well. So you know what we do? We pause and we celebrate and we go out and we have ourselves a great night. We maybe drink a little bit too much. I know I've never done that myself personally. A lot of athletes kind of find themselves waking up a little bit, not feeling the best the next morning after maybe a celebratory night out or a long night out, or that sort of thing that way. And I would imagine that although it's probably a small piece of the nutrition puzzle, the alcohol intake and other things that might be associated with that awesome Friday night after a big win can kind of play some kind of smaller role in this whole nutrition piece as well that way. Not to say don't do it, because I think that, like you mentioned before, we have to have a little bit of balance, and some of that social outlet stuff can be a good thing that way. But I would imagine that there's kind of like a little bit of a filter, if you will, that we have to kind of think about those different long nights out, if you will, that way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, alcohol is a huge topic. I think I'll start with first just saying there's no amount of it that's not poison to everything in the body. It's immediately a toxin to your gut. It's immediately an external toxin to the liver. It's immediately pro-inflammatory. It's immediately problematic for the brain. It does not help you sleep better from a quality standpoint. So there's no element of it that's actually good for us. And it's never been easier to not drink. And so that's just like where I want to start. So I don't think, we're in a time and place that it's never been more accepted to be cool with just deciding you don't want to drink. There's a lot of ways you can still go out and have fun, and that you can kind of get some stress reduction, which is for a lot of reason why athletes or anybody drink, is not for the social, it's for the numbing, calming effect that it gives us in the moment to deal with stress. And so there's a lot of things we can do in place of that. I will just tell you that in my experience with athletes in almost every discipline the last year, I've had dramatic, if not complete abstinence in drinking because it was either harmful to health, or they thought that it was, oh, just a glass of red wine because I love my pasta and I enjoy it. It's not a big deal. But, I can think of someone, that's a Major League Baseball player that's, in one of the two key critical positions where the joints are being often overworked, pitcher and catcher, and reducing just the Monday through Friday to maybe Friday and just Saturday first, and then going, okay, like, do we even really still need Friday and Saturday? Dramatically improved his recovery and inflammatory level. So I think, we should look at alcohol for what it is. It's a poison. It is. That's just what it is. It's immediately negatively impacting everything in the body. So, now if you want to drink, that's completely, your prerogative, but you should know the potential downsides to it. And the list is many. There's no positives, upsides to it anymore. There was a lot of spin on it's good for this, and, it's pretty much all been disproven. Now, does it mean, from time to time enjoying a great glass of something with friends is bad for you? Absolutely not. But you have to understand the trade-off. Like, I'm just at a point in my career, in my relationship with alcohol, that I'm thinking about, okay, if I if I'm going to have a drink today, what do I have to do in the next 2 days after? Because I want zero room for any depletion in my performance. I don't want to be less sharp on this podcast. I don't want to be able to get all my reps out in the gym. I don't want to have poor sleep and then be cranky when I show up to my kids in the morning. Like all that other stuff is so much more valuable to me that I've, dramatically decreased my own alcohol intake. And I wasn't even really a big drinker before. It's impacting hormone levels in these young men and women. I think that's really the biggest thing, that testosterone and growth hormone tied to just sleep patterns, gut health, which is tied to inflammation and immunity, and also our neurotransmitters and mood chemicals, is really impacted in a not positive way from alcohol. And so again, I'm not, there's no hate or shade if you choose to drink, but you should do it understanding what the bigger context is. And if you feel like you're more than a one drink once or twice a week type of person, and you're a high level athlete, or someone trying to improve your health, or you're working towards a goal, then it's probably part of the conversation as much as if you need to eat protein at breakfast and what time you train, because, there's a threshold there where it's going to start to negatively influence you achieving your goals. And so if speed is a friend to you, then alcohol is some huge speed bumps that we should, see if we can reduce or diminish. Again, not out of judgment, out of just saying, hey, we wouldn't go tell our athletes to go eat fast food every day. So why are we saying it's okay to drink alcohol just because it's social and we need to relax? Like it's, it's been hard up until lately for people to be like the black sheep and the non-drinker, but it's definitely become more socially acceptable, I'd say, in the last 12 to 18 months, to be like, yeah, like just, there's so many ways you can also not be drinking, but people don't know. You can have a rocks glass with, a sparkling water with lots of limes, and people might think it's like, something in soda, and so you don't even have to announce it. You can just get a beverage that looks like a drink, so you don't have to talk to anybody about it if you don't want to, just to make that personal decision for yourself. So, I'm down for a good time, and we should do it understanding what the downside is, and there's no upside. In the moment, it's fun, right? But if we all just made decisions on what's in the moment fun, we'd be in a worse off place than we are with our health in this world right now. And we're in a pretty bad place. And that's because we make a lot of decisions based on, in the moment, what feels good. And that doesn't always mean that that's the right thing for us.
Right. It's that instant versus delayed gratification conversation. And it sounds like the conversation around alcohol really comes back to where we started, about knowing yourself and knowing who you're working with and understanding what your goals are, right? If your goal is to become, peak performance, peak potential, and play your sport for as long as possible, then, maybe going out 3 to 4 times a week doesn't really fit that agenda. So you have to really be able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, look, do my actions align with my goals? And if they're not aligning, then one of them has to change. And most people I talk to are not willing to settle for less and not willing to compromise what they've been working thousands and thousands of hours for. So then it becomes a conversation of how can our habits change to better align with what we're working towards that way.
One thing I can add is I want to know from my athletes, if they tell me they drink on a regular basis, if they're using it as a tool, like to go to sleep, to calm their mind down. Because then if that's the case, then we can easily replace that for something that's beneficial and less detrimental. And so I'm just asking questions like, hey, we're just, like I said, how often is it? What's your preferred drink of choice? Like when do you normally find yourself drinking? And then if I feel like it's, if it's like an every night kind of thing or most nights of the week, it's like, hey, well, what would it look like for us to reduce that by half? And, we're, again, like anything else, it's a collaborative decision. I'm never like, you have to stop drinking today. We're making collaborative decisions because, again, it's part of their life. They have to be the one that installs it. I'm giving them all the information, but in the end, they have to do it, right? They have to eat the food. They have to follow the timing. They have to take the supplements at the certain time. And so again, my job is just to keep reminding them of their vision, to help them understand to as much as they want to know why something is, being recommended or suggested or etc. And then to let them, be the CEO and make those decisions. This group of young men that was just like really such a blessing this year that I worked with, getting ready for the NFL Combine and prep, and they hear it from me every year. It's my fourth time with this group at this performance center. Is to the day one is to establish the fact that they are the CEO, not their agent, not the team coach, not the performance center head, not me, not mom, not their partner, them. They are in the driver's seat now. They sit at the head of the table. Their job is to assess all the things coming in. And that's a new vantage point for them because these guys are just coming out of college, working on a boyhood dream. And so empowering them to see their life and their choices through that lens. And then if they want to choose to go out and have a couple beers with some buddies on Friday night, amazing. Make that choice from an empowered position. Know how you could and might feel the next day, how you might prepare for that a little bit better, how you might rehydrate. Just go into things knowing what the up and downside are so that as the CEO, just like you would make any decision for your business, like there's a plan, you understand. And so that's, again, part of our role as the coach and whatever discipline we're in, to empower the athlete at whatever age to understand that they have a say and that they can critically think on their own as part of the process to getting the results. If we're just busy telling them what to do all the time, then I have not done my job because they will not learn anything from me, not be able to repeat any of it. It won't be something they learn for a lifetime. And for me, that's what I'm in for. I'm in for my people learning skills for a lifetime from me so that when they move into their next career, another season of their life, that they learned a few key things from me that will support them being a dad, a mom, a business owner, retired for the rest of their life and enjoying the spoils of their, career and traveling the world. I don't want them to feel like they can't think without me telling them what to do. Like, to me, that's not a job well done. That's not how you champion people. And so, that's how I look at it when we're collaborating on what the plan might look like, whether it's alcohol or not.
Yeah, it puts them in control and ultimately it teaches them the tools that they need to succeed. So, ultimately I say this all the time in relation to my patients from a PT standpoint is I want them to walk out my doors and not have to come back for the same thing because, if that acts up again, they know what to do and how to take care of it, right? It's giving them the tools to succeed, teaching them how to use that, and also getting them to understand what their body is trying to tell them, what it means and what they should do about it. And I think that the more we shift our focus to that and just lifting other people up and getting them to that higher ground of life, the more we emphasize that just serving people and getting them to a better ground, the better off everyone is going to be. And I realized that this conversation around nutrition for the athlete could go on for hours and hours and not even scratch all of the surfaces. We didn't get into the weeds about supplements and so many different things yet. However, I do know that you have a great online presence and you also have a website and so many different things that people should really check out if they haven't yet, because you can obviously fill in all of those gaps for them. Where can people find you at online if they want to learn more or even work with you, Jill?
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I love that we actually didn't get into the nuts and bolts of nutrition because I think the stuff that we covered is really valuable from a professional standpoint. If you want to play the long game, even in your own career as a coach or trainer or whatever you are, I love kind of the direction of our time together. So I really appreciate it. Two main places for me is just my website, jilllane.com, JILLLANE.com, 3 L's, and on Instagram at it's jill.lane. I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I'm really, really working on trying to get better, but in the feed, I have some basic stuff about macros. I spend a ton of time and I've kind of known for, and it's a personal passion of mine to really understand the elite use of supplements in all populations. I'm cross-trained in every population from oncology to sports nutrition. And so that's a personal passion of mine, and maybe we can get together another time to talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Would love to make that happen. Would love to bring you back on to discuss that and even just how nutrition evolves based on when someone is injured as well, because obviously that's a huge conversation that athletes continue to come to me with, right? Hey, I just had this surgery. I've been laying around on the couch for 4 weeks, and now my body weight's up 15 pounds. What happened? And there's so many future conversations to be had here, Jill. And I really appreciate your time and your insights and all of the work that you're doing in the space. And I'm looking forward to working with you again in the future.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Injury risk reduction, return to performance has been a hot topic in the industry the last 2 to 3 years. So a takeaway with that from that would be protein and more protein. And to serve your guys' discipline on the other side is that there's not very many surgeries people have where they should be laying around anymore, right? Like they're up, they're doing stuff very shortly after surgery, and protein and some key supplements like creatine are our friends during that time. So we'll just leave that nugget out there, and then hopefully we can get back together and talk all things supplements and injury risk reduction and return to performance. That'd be a lot of fun.